Johnny Harris said this 2 years ago.
Are you a global superpower looking to project influence in the newly opening Arctic? Look no further than Greenland.
It seems Trump saw this video.
We need Greenland from a national security situation.
From anyone else, this would be a laughable claim. But right after Trump captured Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, nobody is laughing. Katie Miller, the wife of Stephen Miller, one of Trump's closest advisors and deputy chief of staff, tweeted this: "American flag on Greenland." Stephen Miller himself didn't stay silent.
Obviously, Greenland should be part of the United States. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
But this chatter isn't new. Greenland has been on America's radar for quite some time. In 1867, after purchasing Alaska, William H. Seward, the US Secretary of State, showed serious interest in buying Greenland. Then, in 1910, Maurice Francis Egan, US Ambassador to Denmark, proposed a barter trade of territories. Greenland would go to the US in exchange for US territories in the Philippines. That didn't work, but the US approached Denmark again after World War II in 1946. Harry S. Truman offered $100 million in gold to buy Greenland. That's $13 billion of gold today. But Denmark rejected the offer, and soon the idea of buying Greenland went cold. Until 2019, under Trump's first presidency. Trump broached the idea of acquiring Greenland again, but seemed to let it go later. Now, in 2026, Trump is serious. He's not just talking about it, it seems he's actually trying to get Greenland. But the real question is, how? How will Trump take Greenland?
This video is sponsored by Houzeo, America's best home buying and selling platform. Download now.
Trump's interest in real estate and Greenland. Donald Trump has always been a showman. He took over his father's real estate business and became one of the most well-known real estate developers in the world. He's worth around $7.3 billion and owns around 20 major skyscrapers directly or indirectly. What made Trump successful was his tenacity and tactics. He even wrote a book about it, The Art of the Deal.
Well, I wrote a book in the late 80s called The Art of the Deal, and to this day, it's the biggest selling business book ever written.
And, as the President of the United States, Trump brought the same tenacity and tactics to the White House.
He goes in, the bull in the china shop, people think he's going to use force, then when he takes force off the table, they're all like, phew, okay, and then he declares a fait accompli, and now do they look like the bad guys for getting in the way of the fait accompli that he declared today? That's classic Trump negotiating style.
If Trump knows anything, it is how to acquire profitable real estate. And his focus shifted to Greenland. Why Greenland? Well, that is going to be a topic for another video. Stay tuned for that. For now, we will focus on the fact that Trump wants Greenland. In 2019, Donald Trump publicly explored the idea of the United States buying Greenland, but he never made a formal offer. Instead, Trump framed Greenland as a strategic asset, critical for US security, Arctic dominance, and future resources, calling it a massive real estate deal.
Well, a lot of things could be done. I mean, essentially, it's a large real estate deal. And strategically for the United States, it would be nice.
Trump floated the idea publicly, forcing Denmark and Greenland to respond in the open. The Danish PM Mette Frederiksen called the deal absurd.
But I thought that the Prime Minister's statement that it was an absurd idea was nasty. I thought it was an inappropriate statement. All she had to do is say, no, we wouldn't be interested.
Trump never followed up with negotiations, which suggests this was less about closing a deal and more about testing resistance. When Trump regained the presidency in 2025, his interest in Greenland clearly intensified. This time, the POTUS is serious. This time the question is how? Trump can order military action, or use diplomacy to acquire Greenland. Or Trump could use another method, his favorite method, which we'll talk about in a bit. But first, let's look at military takeover. Greenland is a 1,600-mile-long island. It has 57,000 residents and is situated smack in between the US and Russia. Greenland is also a Danish territory. It was Denmark's colony from 1721 to 1953. That's 232 years. In 1979, Greenland achieved home rule.
On June 21st, Greenland's National Day, the Arctic territory introduced self-rule, moving one step closer toward independence from Denmark.
The country now had expanded autonomy while staying in the Danish realm. Independence, though, remains an ongoing debate.
Is independence an option and a choice for the Greenlandic people?
The last opinion poll showed 56% in favor of Greenlandic independence.
After World War II, Americans had a strong presence in Greenland. At the peak, the US operated 17 bases in Greenland. But as of 2026, only one base is active. The Bidufik base, although it is now converted into a space base. Through Bidufik Space Base, the US monitors Arctic airspace and surveys the surrounding seas. For now, US assets at Bidufik operate with Danish approval. But given the recent interest in owning Greenland, things show signs of shifting.
I have tremendous respect for both the people of Greenland and the people of Denmark. Tremendous respect. But every NATO ally has an obligation to be able to defend their own territory. And the fact is, no nation or group of nations is in any position to be able to secure Greenland other than the United States. We're a great power.
Well, this is for US. Whereas Denmark has 150 military personnel permanently stationed on the island. But given Trump's recent interest in owning Greenland, things show signs of shifting. Denmark recently sent 200 more combat-ready soldiers via Operation Arctic Endurance, including the Royal Danish Army Chief Peter Boysen. Denmark also sent 4 large frigates and several small ships to patrol the Arctic. But if US attacks Greenland, this is how. Phase 1, Bidufik coup de main. The US would likely deploy 500 to 1,000 US Marines from 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, Camp Lejeune. They'll be airlifted via C-17s to Pituffik, with the existing 150 to 200 personnel securing the runway. V-22 Ospreys deploy 82nd Airborne paratroopers to Nuuk and Kangerlussuaq airports, neutralizing Joint Arctic Command headquarters. Phase 2, air and maritime isolation. F-35s from Tuul-Pituffik establish a no-fly zone. 2 to 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers with Tomahawks blockade coasts, sinking Danish Thetis-class patrols. B-52s loiter for precision strikes on reinforcements. Phase 3, compulsion and control. 1st Marine Expeditionary Brigade with 5,000 troops, AAV-7s, HIMARS, seizes key sites like mineral-rich mines and radar sites. MQ-9 Reapers Special Operations Forces teams, SEALs and Delta, decapitate command in 72 hours. No need for armor brigades against over 200 Danes. Analysts note the US would not need substantial forces. If the US tries something like this, the other NATO countries have said they will declare war on the US. But let's just compare the US military with that of NATO's. Active military personnel, total Navy fleets, total military aircrafts, total nuclear warheads. In the defense equation, America still dominates. But NATO isn't without options. A US attempt to seize Greenland would ignite intense NATO Article 5 debates.
This union of 12 nations became known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or more simply, NATO. They were sworn to stand together against aggression. An attack against one would be an attack against all.
Any US aggression would prompt Article 5 activation. It would allow Denmark and NATO allies to use deadly force in retaliation.
Of course, Denmark is the ones that's most concerned about this. It's us that's being threatened. So for us, for sure, NATO would be over. There's no question of that. We can't be in an alliance with someone that attacks us. So obviously, a military threat is the immediate end of our engagement in NATO. I don't think there's any question of that.
This was only invoked once historically post 9/11. Allied forces supported the US to retaliate and defend US soil.
The United States was attacked on September 11th, 2001, we took that personal. It was like an attack on us. And we went to fight in Afghanistan. 43 of our soldiers were killed, hundreds were wounded. There's veterans in Denmark that's limping around without legs today because of that fight.
Now, this force would work against the US. It would compel allies like UK, Germany, France into direct conflict with the US, fracturing NATO's core. NATO's Article 5's vague wording allows opt-outs, but the EU's Article 42.7 can apply separately. It is the bloc's Mutual Assistance Clause. Unlike NATO's Article 5, activation rests with the victim state. There's no Central Council vote required. Article 42.7 allows bilateral support, military, diplomatic, or otherwise, without overriding neutral states like Ireland or Austria. Denmark could trigger it against US annexation, binding 26 other EU states minus non-members to respond independently of NATO. This would potentially isolate the US and unify Europe. It's risky, and it's highly unlikely the US will go through with it. But Republican Congressman Randy Fine introduced the Greenland Annexation and Statehood Act on January 12, 2026. The bill grants executive authority for whatever steps necessary to negotiate or acquire Greenland, citing Arctic security against China and Russia. The bill hasn't passed yet, but it is a sign that at least some elements in the Trump administration aren't taking the threat of NATO collapse seriously. But Trump has a trump card to play here. By declaring a security emergency, Trump can create a naval blockade on the GI-UK gap. The United States would frame this limited naval security operation in these waters as protection against Russian submarine activity, monitoring Chinese research vessels, safeguarding undersea cables and seabed infrastructure. This move will severely affect transit, with inspections, temporary exclusion zones, and military exercises to create pressure. These restrictions might disrupt Greenland's supply lines, causing public unrest. But aggression is Trump's last resort. As they say, you attract more flies with honey, or in this case, money. Diplomatic. In 2026, Trump tried to buy people of Greenland. Trump offered $10,000 to $100,000 per Greenlander to choose Washington instead of Copenhagen. That comes to a total of $570 million to $5.7 billion, excluding payments to Denmark. Trump's next tactic is to make Greenlanders believe they would flourish under Washington. Trump and advisors consistently argue that Denmark's annual $600 million block grant to Greenland makes the island a financial liability for Copenhagen, but a strategic bargain for Washington.
Message to Denmark is very simple. You have not done a good job by the people of Greenland. You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass filled with incredible people. That has to change.
If that doesn't work, Trump could start an independence movement in Greenland. Under the 2009 Greenland Self-Rule Act, Greenland can legally vote for independence from Denmark via referendum. Greenland already controls most domestic policy, while Denmark still handles defense and foreign affairs. Washington doesn't need to seize Greenland. It just needs to help it stand alone. Once independent, Greenland could sell territories, lease sovereign rights, enter a compact of free association. That's the same legal structure the US uses with Micronesia, Palau, and Marshall Island. In those cases, the US controls defense and airspace. The host country receives billions of dollars in long-term aid. Sovereignty exists, but strategic control belongs to Washington. Trump's team has openly discussed this model. Trump has already made some strides in the diplomatic route. On 21st December 2025, Trump appointed Jeff Landry, governor of Louisiana and a close political ally, as U.S. Special Envoy to Greenland, while Landry remained in office as governor.
Denmark's prime minister warning of dire consequences if the U.S. tries to seize Greenland, including the possible end of NATO. Joining us now is Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry. He's a U.S. Special Envoy to Greenland, working with the president on a plan to acquire the territory.
The appointment was highly unusual. Greenland is not a state, ally, or adversary normally assigned a dedicated envoy. The role bypassed traditional State Department structures. The move signaled that Greenland was no longer a background security issue. It was a top-tier presidential project, handled by a loyal negotiator accustomed to transactional politics rather than multilateral diplomacy. However, this is still quite unlikely. According to polls, over 85% of Greenlanders do not want to become part of the United States. Out of the remaining 15%, only 6% are in favor of becoming a part of the US. 9% of the people are undecided. Furthermore, All Greenlandic political parties have issued a joined statement stating, "We don't want to be Americans." With the people of Greenland not favoring Trump, he is left with one choice, one that the business tycoon is quite familiar with. Coercion. The plan to coerce Denmark into passing control over Greenland is actually quite simple.
Tariffs. Tariffs.
Tariffs. Yes, Trump's word of the year shines yet again. Denmark is a small, export-dependent economy, with the United States being its most important trading partner. The US maintained about 17 to 18% share of Danish exports, and this is primarily in the pharmaceutical section. So the plan? A targeted tariff regime on pharmaceuticals, shipping, wind energy components, or high-value industrial exports. This would hit Copenhagen far harder than Washington. The message would be implicit but unmistakable. Cooperate on Greenland or pay for it at the border. But Denmark possesses several protections and countermeasures against targeted US tariffs. The country's biggest defense weapon? The EU anti-coercion instrument. The EU's trade bazooka, adopted in 2023, allows countermeasures like reciprocal tariffs, service barriers, or investment freezes. If US tariffs are deemed economic coercion over Greenland, Denmark could trigger it swiftly, and the sanctions would hit US sectors from tech to agriculture with 25 to 100% duties. And Denmark could really hit the US where it hurts. How? Novo Nordisk, the company behind the ever-popular GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, is from Denmark. Denmark holds a powerful counter-leverage by restricting Ozempic and Wegovy exports. Novo Nordisk controls about 55% of the global GLP-1 market and supplies critical insulin to the US. Disrupting these would spike US drug prices 30 to 50% and cause shortages for millions of patients. Denmark flips the script, starves America's obesity crisis to save Greenland. Denmark will suffer short-term pain, but the impact on the US would be huge. Aggression, diplomacy, or coercion. There are three paths, all with their own challenges. But even if Trump tries to push through, he may end up facing opposition within the US instead of outside it. Trump will end up facing fierce domestic opposition from Congress, public opinion, pharma lobbies, and healthcare voters. Any action will face derailment through resolutions, impeachment threats, and economic blowback. An attempt at a bipartisan congressional bloc has already happened. Senator Ruben Gallego introduced a January 6, 2026 resolution barring funds for Greenland military action. Republicans like Tom Tillis said,
"To me, it's a war powers resolution flexing a message that I don't agree with in the same week that I'm happy with what they did. In the future, if boots go on the ground, of course we're going to have a war powers resolution.
That's the line for you.
Yeah."
And Don Bacon said,
"These threats and bullying of an ally are wrong. And just on the weird chance that he's serious about invading Greenland, I want to let him know that it would probably be the end of his presidency. Most Republicans know this is immoral and wrong, and we're going to stand up against it."
Senators Jean Shaheen and Lisa Murkowski introduced the NATO Unity Protection Act on January 12, 2026. It prohibits Department of Defense and State Department funds from being used to blockade, occupy, annex, or control any NATO member's sovereign territory without that ally's consent or North Atlantic Council approval. But it permits defensive operations against non-NATO threats, preserving Arctic capabilities. And this isn't just elite diplomacy. Only 28% Americans support the purchase of Greenland, 45% oppose, and 27% are not sure. There have been hands-off Greenland protests, clearly showing what ordinary Americans think about the push for Greenland. Midterms loom in 2026, and GOP risks suburban backlash in pharma-heavy states like North Carolina and New Jersey. Don't underestimate the pharma lobby. Novo Nordisk's and pharma's combined lobbying and advocacy budget is estimated at over $100 million, all set aside for crisis scenarios like export restrictions tied to the Greenland standoff. This dwarfs typical pharma spends, framing Trump as risking voter health for Arctic dirt. That's enough to flip 10 to 15 House seats in pharma states, forcing GOP defections on funding resolutions. So Trump needs to face bipartisan opposition, public dissatisfaction, midterm uncertainty, and international pressure to get Greenland. And the irony is, Russia wants the US to get Greenland. US says it wants Greenland to limit Russian influence over the Arctic. Russia is saying, "Go on, don't let us stop you." This is what former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev had to say.
Make America great again, make equals, make Denmark small again, equals, make Europe poor again. Has this idea finally sunk in, dimwits?
Russia will be the happiest country in the world if the US's Greenland push ends up imploding NATO and ends the existing world order. Why? This puts Europe in a difficult position. They'll be too busy with their own problems to care about Ukraine. And Russia cares more about Ukraine than Greenland.
I've said many times that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian peoples to be one nation. In fact, in this sense, all of Ukraine is ours.
As far as they're concerned, the US can have Greenland. It is a colony of Denmark and not its natural territory anyway. So the question isn't really whether Trump wins Greenland, it's whether Trump will destroy NATO in the process. What do you think? Do you think Trump should go on acquiring Greenland regardless of the consequences? If you want a deep dive into why Trump wants Greenland, we'll explore that in detail in our next video.